Well, hello there.
Hi there.
It's been a long time since you've been on this channel.
It has been a few months.
And who's to blame for that? It's certainly not me. I've read The Sandman before, and people have been clamoring for the next episode in what we're calling Sharing the Sandman with my wife, except my wife hasn't been ready.
Yeah, I've just been really preoccupied reading prose, which I know is a silly thing to say on a channel called For the Love of Comics.
So you're putting all the blame on to Hilary Mantel.
Among others, yeah.
Well, it's been a very tumultuous couple of months since you were last here, both on a personal level as well as a literal global level. But I'm glad to have you back on this show.
I'm glad to be here.
For those of you not familiar, Sharing the Sandman with my wife is a proposed series of videos in which we go through Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, volume by volume, Ashwita for the very first time and me as a returning reader. If you haven't caught our previous episodes, episode 0 being an introduction to Ashwita and myself, and episode 1 in which we discuss Preludes and Nocturnes, volume 1 of The Sandman, I'll link them up here and in the description below. And today we're going to be talking about
Volume 2 of The Sandman, at last, The Doll's House.
And just like before, Ashwita has been reading The Sandman in these collected editions. You've got a hardcover edition over here.
Yeah, this nice slim little hardcover.
And I've been reading them in the single issues. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what you thought of this second volume. So just like before, let's start with a general view of what you felt, and then we can go specifically chapter by chapter, or in my case, issue by issue. So what did you think of The Doll's House?
I loved it. It was so easy to like, especially compared to Preludes and Nocturnes, which I found a little bit difficult to get into. But for one thing, I feel like it got going a lot quicker. So on the one hand, you've got this expansion of the world that you already know, and you find out a little bit more about characters whom you've spent some time with, but you also find out more about people who were just present for a few panels in the previous volume. So I liked how it built on what you already knew, and I also really liked how quickly the kind of setup worked, how quickly the plot just got going.
Actually, Preludes and Nocturnes wasn't even the first volume of Sandman to be published. The Doll's House was the first volume to be collected together. And because it was so successful and because it was so popular, they went back and collected the previous 7 issues. So you're quite right in saying it's actually a much more gripping story. That's the first story they decided to collect, leaving aside the first 7 issues. So you're starting with issue number 9. But issue number 9 actually doesn't feature any of the characters that you've seen before.
It does. Well, of course, besides Morpheus, obviously, it also features somebody whom you see in just one panel or a couple of panels when Dream goes to hell in Preludes and Nocturnes, Nada.
Yes.
So I remember her, and I remember at that point thinking, oh, I wonder if they're ever going to explain this little bit of backstory, and they did. So I was really pleased about that. And I really liked this issue. I really liked the story. I liked the way it talked about, it gave you a little bit more insight into the kind of person that Dream is, but it also had an interesting sort of theme, which was storytelling and how people tell stories in different ways. And sometimes the version of a story that you hear is only one version. There could be others.
What kind of a person do you think Dream is? Because he sort of comes across as a bit of a jackass, doesn't he?
He does. He is a bit of a jerk. He comes across as somebody who just wants to take whatever he wants. Like he doesn't come across as somebody who is very into compromise. So I found that to be an interesting aspect of him. And I think it's a good way to start the volume because that aspect of him does become more apparent through the rest of the issues that are in this volume.
The other thing that I did not actually remember until I saw you reading this collected volume is, I think, yes, this cover over here says Doll's House Prologue. Whereas the original cover, it still features the title The Sandman with the subtitle Master of Dreams, which was the case in the first 8 issues. This is the last issue that says Master of Dreams. So it's the collected edition that presents this story tale in the sand as the prologue to the Doll's House. Whereas in its original publication, apparently there was no connection between this and the arc that follows in the titling of it, which is something that I thought was interesting. And did you like it as a prologue?
I did. I liked it very much because I think it does give you a sense of the themes that are going to come up later on. And it kind of presents a different side of Morpheus to you, which I think acts as a little bit of foreshadowing for the kind of person that he turns out in the rest of the story.
You keep saying Morpheus. Has he been called Morpheus yet in the story?
I think so.
But I know that he isn't in this story, obviously, because this is an African tale and they're referring to him.
Kai Cool, I think. Yeah, that's how Nada refers to him in Hell as well. Oh, and the other interesting thing about this story and how it presents Dream or Morpheus is that the thing that I sort of picked up from the subtext in the previous volume was that he appears, or his appearance changes depending on who is looking at him. And I think this kind of bears that out because obviously he appears differently in Tales in the Sand to how he appears later on.
So, chapter 1 of The Doll's House, which is issue 10 in the original series. This is where we get introduced to some new characters. What did you think of them?
I liked them. Overall, I really liked this issue as a beginning. I really like that it starts with Desire and Despair, who apparently are siblings of Dream and Death. And I'm interested in finding out more about them. They come across as slightly more petty than the other two. So I like that there was a sort of difference in the way that you see these powerful immortals.
So what did you get about these siblings? Do you know how many there are?
There's Desire, there's Destiny, there's Death, there's Dream, there's Despair. So 5 Ds.
There's a part over here where she says the older 3 don't play our games.
Yeah, which is probably why I got this sense that these guys were a little bit more, they were like small players who were trying to undermine the big 3. So I thought that was interesting because I like mythology and I like that the mythos of the Sandman is expanding.
So it could also be that desire and despair are somehow lesser emotions or lesser feelings than dream and destiny and death, which seem to be more significant and more universal, or at least less petty.
Yeah.
But there's another thing that I don't know if you caught, which is one of the first things that Desire and Despair talk about.
Oh, right. Where they're talking about a vortex.
No, before that.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Okay. I did not know what that meant. Who is the prodigal? I figured that it would be answered later on in the volume, but it wasn't. So is it going to be answered later on in a different volume?
I don't know. I just thought that I should point that out.
Well, they also discuss the fact that they're the ones behind the whole incident with Nada. How Nada was a mistake. So you find out that everything that happened in the prologue was that these two were behind everything that happened in the prologue. Oh, while we're on the subject of desire, I had a question for you. So there's the doll's house, obviously, that appears later on in this issue. And there's one panel in which there is a little face inside the doll's house. And I'm not sure who that is. I think it's Desire, but I wanted to know if you had an opinion.
I think it's pretty obviously Sandman.
Is it? I was confused about that because it does look like Dream's hair, but I wasn't sure.
I think it's Morpheus.
There's sort of a gleeful look on the face, though. He doesn't really look gleeful. Anyway, I suppose we could ask people if there is a difference of opinions or if I've just gotten it wrong.
Well, I mean, the thing is that whoever it is, why are they in the doll's house? Why are they looking out of the doll's house window? I mean, like, is this something that really comes up in the story? Is this doll's house somehow haunted or presence of these endless in it? I mean, I don't really know if it connects to the story or if it's just a little artistic flourish.
Well, I'm not sure, but I think there is this running theme of people in the different realms looking in on each other. So you've got Rose, who keeps viewing what Morpheus is doing in his dreaming. And you've got Morpheus, who is also looking in on Rose and seeing what she's doing. And in the same issue that we're on, you also see the kindly ones. Right here, after Rose leaves her mother and newly discovered grandmother alone. So you've got people constantly looking in on each other.
You're right, because the interesting thing about this issue is this thing of slipping between these realms, something that we have seen only Dream do before, where he goes, even the way he escapes from Roderick Burgess's little prison, is that he goes and steals sand from a dream, and then he moves from dream to dream, and then he equips himself and he gets out. But this is the first time you see somebody else do it, because he's the one who's been traveling from realm to realm. He's gone to hell, he's gone to meet the three witches, the kindly ones. So he's moved from place to place. But in this one, you see Rose do it, and she does it when she sleeps.
Yep.
And one of the most interesting things about this issue is the manner in which this is depicted. She's in this car which has picked them up from the airport, and she's sleeping in the back seat. But as she's sleeping, the page itself tilts. The word balloons guide you to now hold the comic up like this, so that you would be something that you were looking at this way starts being read this way, and then you're in the dreaming, because you're following Lucian and Abel talking about Goldie and the census, and Lucian walking back, and then this entire sequence of him talking with Dream is sideways. And as you're reading this sideways, they start talking about Rose and say she's in the corner, and then when Lucian's looking at her, you've got one caption box that's sideways, to read which you've got to again move the comic back, and now you're back to the land of the waking. So the moving of the comic itself is very interesting, and it helps you move from one realm to the other with Rose, but you don't have that kind of guidance when she walks into that room and meets these three people.
No.
It's not like she's dreaming and she slipped into the realm. So the only conclusion I can draw is they've come into her realm, and maybe we'll find out later if this is something significant or not.
Do you mean later in this volume or later in the series?
Well, we shall just see. But these are people you have met before.
Yep.
And what do you think they're doing over here?
Clearly, they're here to give her a fairly cryptic and useless warning. But I did find it interesting that they called her my daughter, sister, child. So I was wondering what that meant, whether they were addressing her as somebody whom they recognize as also being sort of supernatural or inflected with something that is not quite rooted in reality, or whether there was something more to that.
I guess we'll see. Because it could be Rose, but it could be the vortex itself, which, as we see, is passed down genetically to her from
Unity Kincaid.
So maybe they're not here for Rose, but here for Unity, or whatever the vortex may be. So maybe what they're referring to
is that power.
Got yes. It. And then you've got this one last sequence.
Oh my goodness, yes. So that is a return of the creep factor of the Sandman, I think.
Because you have seen the Corinthian mentioned as one of the four entities that have gone missing from the dreaming while Morpheus was away.
Brute and Glob, the Corinthian, Fiddler's Green, and
some lesser creatures.
Yeah.
But the Corinthian over here is shown as a nightmare with teeth instead of eyes, which, I mean, that's pretty nightmarish.
Which I honestly missed the first time I read it.
So that's part one. So we've got the setup for something really magical and mystical, something that has to do with the realm of the dreaming and the realm of the wake. We've got this conspiracy that's being hatched by two siblings of Dream in order to entrap him, something they've tried before. But we also have this, as you said, this horror aspect of this nightmare out there somewhere that has escaped. And I think the ending is another one of those cross-realm things where we understand that the nightmare that escaped from the dreaming is now in the real world, because we see him with this guy in the bathtub, like a serial killer in a hotel room.
Yep.